guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to this afternoon's live stream. And we're a few weeks into the transfer window now. The boys are back at Cobham in pre-season training. We're jetting off to the United States at the weekend, but still there's no official incomings at Chelsea. But we're getting close now with a couple of deals. Hopefully some will be done before we jet off to the States at the weekend. Linked with plenty of names as always. And I'm delighted to be joined by journalist Ben Jacobs to go through some of the latest transfer news and rumours, how close some of these deals are and how likely some of the players are to join that we've been linked with. Ben, thanks so much for joining me as always, mate. Really appreciate your time. Before we get into the likes of Ronaldo and Neymar, I want to start with a couple of deals that are potentially a lot closer. Raheem Sterling, obviously Thomas Tuchel's number one attacking target. I'm a little bit surprised when we first were linked with him. It's not a very Chelsea signing over the years if you look at it under Roman Abramovich, but I guess it kind of shows a change in tact under Todd Boehly. I've always advocated on the channel, that we should be going for more Premier League proven players. And there's not many more proven than Raheem Sterling, 27 years of age, got a great goal scoring record, great pedigree. I think it's a really exciting signing. How close is this one now? Because I think Sterling's happy to move. City obviously want around 50-55 million pounds. I guess it can be 45 plus add-ons, I reckon, is what the end fee might roughly be. But I mean, can you see this being wrapped up this week?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Raheem Sterling to Chelsea is very much a case of when rather than if. And I know that fans get frustrated when they keep hearing it's close, it's very close, it's very, very close, it's imminent. But this is the transfer window. And when you follow a deal hour on hour or day on day, you're going to get impatient. But Chelsea and Manchester City have now said for almost the last 2 weeks that they're both confident a deal will get done. Sterling's put his house up for sale to Trent Alexander-Arnold of all people. I believe he's open to the move. This isn't likely to be hijacked by anybody, and the clubs have never been too far apart as regards add-ons or basic fee. Manchester City started with a belief, this was probably around about a month ago, that Sterling was valued at 60 million all in. That was always going to be too high, but that's the starting gambit. And Chelsea began lowball, comparing Sterling to Sadio Mane and saying 35 million should do it. And naturally, as was always going to be the case, they have compromised. And like you correctly say, the base fee is believed to be somewhere in the region of 45 million, which is consistent with what I've reported and been told over the course of the last 3 weeks, really, that Man City wanted the same rough fee for Jesus, who's been confirmed at Arsenal today, as Raheem Sterling. So 90 million add-ons on top. And the add-ons are just to be determined. The talks are advanced. Chelsea are very confident. Manchester City believe that the deal will be done as well. And there's no suggestion that Raheem Sterling won't agree to it. So I do think that this deal will be 100% done this week as far as the clubs and the player are concerned. And then naturally, there's a few things like medicals, signing the paperwork and so on. But this is not one, as far as sources lead me to believe, that is a case of worry or panic or delays or problems. It all seems to be relatively smooth, and the clubs either today or tomorrow should get to a point where everything is agreed, and from there it will be wrapped up very fast.
No, perfect. I mean, it's always nice to hear when a deal's incoming pretty soon. This week would be perfect, obviously, with the States trip coming up at the weekend for the pre-season tour. Great to integrate Sterling into that somehow. Just on this, Ben, as I touched on before, it's not a very Chelsea signing. As I said, under Roman Abramovich, we didn't really tend to sign the top talent from within the Premier League. It was always going for a big name abroad, where we've not really had an awful lot of success. I mean, what do you make of this signing in itself when it does eventually go through? I mean, do you reckon it's a good signing for Chelsea? Because he's definitely an exciting player. But I mean, I know Twitter's not the best place to go, but very much divides opinion. And for some of his Sterling's record, I find that quite extraordinary that there's people that don't think it's a good signing. Or, I mean, do you think he'll fit the system as well that Tuchel's looking to play?
Absolutely. I think it's a marquee signing, to be perfectly honest with you. And when you consider that Romelu Lukaku has now completed his loan move to Inter and scored 8 times, and Raheem Sterling, 13 Premier League goals last season, double figures the season before with 10. 20, his best season in the Premier League in 19 and 20. And then in the seasons before that, he surpassed 15 goals. So you have to go all the way back to 2016-17 in the Premier League to find a worse figure of goals returned from Sterling comparative to Romelu Lukaku last season at Chelsea. He is a perfect signing, and it's nothing to do with Todd Boehly in terms of let's suddenly buy proven Premier League talent. Bowley's only been interim sporting director for a matter of weeks and at the football club for around about a month, at least officially. This is all about Thomas Tuchel seeing an opportunity with the arrival of Erling Haaland and realizing that Sterling at 27 ticks every single box. He's exciting, he's versatile, he's a goal scorer, he's a good dressing room influence, he's at the right age, he offers value, and due to his contract situation, I don't even think that 45 million plus add-ons is a particularly high fee. 60 million plus add-ons perhaps would have been. But what Chelsea need to do is close the gap on Liverpool and Manchester City. And you can look at Sterling in terms of the system, the other players, the other options, previous Chelsea signings, but none of that means anything. The thing with Sterling is, are you going to get more goals and assists and a better fit and dressing room influence with Sterling or with another option? And I can't think of another option out there except perhaps Gabriel Jesus that is going to be a better signing for Chelsea to achieve that goal, which is to solidify themselves in Champions League football. But that's just an innate, natural expectation anyway. So doing that's not necessarily going to win any plaudits. But if they get closer to the top two teams in the Premier League through Sterling's goals, then his signing will be a success. So I think this is definitely a name that Chelsea fans should be getting very, very excited about.
Yeah, no, I've definitely swung around to it. I've warmed to it a lot more than with the initial links. And, look at his output over the years. It's so much better than what Chelsea have currently got and what we've had over the years. So I think it can definitely make a difference. But again, we've got to be patient with him. I know he's got Premier League experience, but it's going to be different playing for Chelsea than it is for City, different style of play. So there will be a little bit of adaptation time. But I've got no doubts that Raheem Sterling will be a success. I mean, Ben, whilst we're still with Manchester City, Nathan Ake, how close is that to being done, Chelsea and Manchester City? Tuchel, again, is a big fan of Ake. I think the versatility is very appealing. Left back, can play in the centre-back positions as well. I did see some reports saying that there's maybe rumours that the deal could be linked, so it could almost be a double deal. From what you understand, is that the case? And are Chelsea quite advanced with Nathan Ake, or is that still a little bit to go before that can be announced?
I think that Ake and Sterling are separate. There's overlap in the sense that if you're talking to Manchester City about one, you're not going to walk out the door, walk back in, and then take a meeting 15 minutes later. But there's no ability by buying two players to get a cut price on one of them. It's leveraged to some extent because you are essentially saying to Manchester City, we've got the best part of 85 million on the table that we might give you, but City are well aware of Ake's value and they're not going to reduce that just because Chelsea are looking at a 2-for-1. So my understanding remains that Sterling has always been the priority and that's a separate deal. And then talks continue on Ake with nothing quite as imminent. Now, you may get a scenario if Chelsea choose to proceed and can agree a fee where both start to escalate, especially because we know that Chelsea need centre-backs. But Ake is one of many that Chelsea have looked at in the defensive department, whereas Sterling is the number one attacking priority. And the thing with Ake is that he is free to find a new club, and there's absolutely no denying that Chelsea have an interest in bringing him back, but they want to do so at a price that gives them value. And I don't think that price will end up being 55, but I also don't think it will transpire to be 30 or 35. And then once you hit that middle ground of, let's say, 40 or 45 odd million, depending on if we're talking about add-ons, you have to look at other targets and say, well, for that, you could start basically revisiting Jules Koundé for only 10 odd million more, or you can not get Ake and put some of that finance towards De Ligt. And with De Ligt and with Koundé, they're still in an ideal world anyway, the two defensive priorities. Now, we know about the challenges with Koundé, but Chelsea haven't given up. We know that with De Ligt, that is progressing. But you have to balance the fact that Chelsea are not, one, going to be able to spend, let's say, 40 or 45 million on all 6 players that they might bring in on average. Otherwise, that's almost 240 million plus potentially the add-ons. And that is, I would say, the absolute maximum, and still probably 50 million above the maximum that they would want to budget. And that is also the challenge here, that there's going to have to be a compromise on fee or type of player, simply because of the volume that Chelsea need to bring in, which is likely to be a series of signings up to, if not a minimum of, 6. Yeah. So therefore, with the centre-backs in particular, once Chelsea determine who their number one centre-back is, the secondary centre-back could well alter accordingly. So Ake is in the mix for sure, and it's still a very real possibility. I know that Newcastle have come in with late interest, and there's plenty of other clubs looking at him as well, which is why Manchester City might hold a little firmer on their valuation. But make no mistake that Sterling is the imminent, absolute priority that Chelsea feel is all but done, even though talks and financial negotiations are still continuing. Whereas Ake is an admired player that Chelsea obviously know very well, but I certainly wouldn't call him, even if he arrives, the number one defensive target.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, I would agree on that. I mean, I wouldn't be totally against him coming as long as it was alongside another more established defender like a De Ligt or a Koundé. And I certainly agree that I know Manchester City paid Bournemouth £40 million from a few years ago. I wouldn't be comfortable as a fan perspective with Chelsea potentially spending £40 million to get him back. If we could arrange something in the £35 million mark, I think that's okay. But I mean, Ben, whilst we're on defenders, we might as well stick with it. Matthijs de Ligt is understandably the main Chelsea target at centre-back, seemingly moving ahead of Jules Koundé in that regard. Juventus are playing, it's going to be tough to do negotiation with Juventus. The initial talk was the Timo Werner plus sort of the 35-40 million euros. Then potentially they're actually maybe more interested in Christian Pulisic as an alternative. How is this still progressing from what you know? Are Juve happy to accept a player like a Timo Werner, or is it moving more towards straight cash? Because I'm seeing that they could be demanding potentially as much as £70 million. So whereabouts are we in sort of negotiations with this deal?
I think, as with Lukaku's loan to Inter, Chelsea and Juventus, and it's very much a two-way conversation, have explored all the options that you mentioned. And as soon as you get to a hypothetical swap deal or a reported possibility of it in the media and multiple players are mentioned, it usually means that the club that might take one of those incomings in a swap deal, in this case Juventus, haven't actually made their mind up, or none of them quite make financial sense. And I compare De Ligt to Skriniar in the sense that when Chelsea went to Inter, they very much wanted Milan Skriniar as one of two defensive options, Alessandro Bastoni being the other one. And even though Inter are resigned to losing Skriniar, probably now to PSG, they didn't want to have that conversation in the context of a swap deal. And the reason for that is because a straight cash deal, they felt, by pitting suitors against each other, was always going to get them more money. And that may well be proven to be the case now over the coming weeks as PSG advance their talks. But Skriniar was available. So it's very neat, therefore, for Chelsea or Juventus to look at a swap deal and say, well, other players are available in this context. It knocks off the value, but swap deals are complicated. And Todd Boehly will obviously try and take aspects of baseball trades into football, but it's definitely not as easy in this particular sport. So it's heading towards a straight cash deal. And one of the reasons for that is because Chelsea at 100 odd million euros, which was the sort of market value price being quoted with a lot of interest, were never going to pay that. So a swap deal was the only way they were going to get to the table with Juventus. But Juventus have now softened on the price a little bit. And one of the reasons for that is because it's been made clear by De Ligt that he would like to go to the Premier League. and is open to a variety of moves. Chelsea are by no means the only Premier League club that have made inquiries. And the other thing is just that there's a feeling at Juventus's end, if he was to join a club like Chelsea, that the add-ons can be negotiated in a preferential way, with him only being at the age of 22, that they can still commercialise from him, whether that's because Chelsea do well and go far in the Champions League, or individual performances, or who knows, even in 3, 4, 5 years' time, a sell-on fee is still very possible at quite a high rate as well. And therefore, Juventus feel that they can recoup a fair amount of money. But the two clubs are still a little bit apart in negotiations. So Chelsea's stance in a straight cash deal is going to be more to try and get it in the 60 to 65 million mark. I'd be surprised whether they make any headway unless they increase to a minimum of 70 million. And as you say, it still could be 75, but 75 is still a better situation than 85 plus, which was the original position of Juventus. With a swap deal, the interesting thing is that Werner creeped in first, then Pulisic did, and Pulisic is actually very open to a move to Serie A, and he knows Weston McKennie very well and has heard good things. But the player that Juventus want, in all likelihood, separate to any of these talks, is Jorginho. So it's a case of watching this space as to whether totally after this deal gets done or running parallel with it, Juventus also come in for Jorginho, and whether Chelsea have got any desire at this point to sell, because they're running around trying to find two attackers. They're trying to fill the centre back void, and they probably need two. A right back, depending on what happens with Kepa, a goalkeeper may have to come in as well. And everyone knows that Jorginho, Kante replacement or replacements need to be found, but it's kind of not been the priority. So I'm not sure, with the volume of outgoings at Chelsea's end this early in the window, with pre-season about to start, they'll be particularly happy about letting either Kante or Jorginho, should the opportunity arise, go, simply because then all they have building to the season is yet another outgoing without another incoming in that position. And that, again, is the challenge. If you do a swap deal that isn't like for like in position, it can put off a club like Chelsea, even if they got their target that way, because then they realise in getting that target that they've left a hole in another area of the field. So this is what generally makes a swap deal complicated. But De Ligt is progressing. It's nowhere near as advanced at this point as, say, Sterling. But over the course of perhaps the next week or two, we should learn more as to whether the clubs can get a financial agreement. And if they do, it appears anyway, speaking to sources, that the player himself is very open to the move.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd be delighted to take Matthijs de Ligt. I think he's a fantastic player. 22 years of age. He's already shown great leadership qualities through that run at Ajax. I mean, I've seen people say that he's not been that good at Juventus. I mean, I don't watch Serie A an awful lot, but I actually think he's done quite well there. I don't think he's been as bad as some people make him out to be. He's versatile, can play in a four. He's probably comfortable across all three positions in a back three, in terms of the centre-back positions, left, right and centre. I think it's a fantastic sign, I really do. And if something can be arranged, I think I'd be really happy with that. I think it's a great signing, considering, losing Christensen, losing Rudiger. I know he's not quite as experienced as Rudiger, but this guy, if he wants to be, one, we've got immense resale value in him as well, that if he were to move on in 4 or 5 years' time, he's still 27, his value will increase, or won't exactly lose money on him. And he's potentially going to spend the prime years of his career at Chelsea. I think it's just a win-win all round if it can be sorted.
Well, I think the only thing is at 22, you can look at it both ways. There's areas that need improving, but he's extremely mature. He's a superb personality and hard worker off the field. I've watched a ton of him, and you can definitely see the potential. The worry naturally for the player and Chelsea is when you sign for such a big transfer fee, you immediately come with expectations of being the complete package. And my feeling with De Ligt is that he's an extremely complete defender, and he has this brilliant sense of positional awareness. His reading of the game is first rate and always has been, even 3-4 years ago when he was a teenager. And he works hard. He does a lot of unsung things. He's always, from what I hear anyway, first out and last into training. And he's got a great winning mentality. He's strong. and he's pretty good in the air as well. The one area that he either needs to improve, and you can improve in this area, but it's obviously harder, is that he's not the quickest. So if you're therefore alongside Thiago Silva and the two centre-backs either have to cross over and cover each other or track back or move into a slightly more unnatural position, at that point, the pace, even though I wouldn't call him slow by any stretch of the imagination, but the pace is the one area. And I think that might be the thing that has put off one or two other clubs. And obviously, you can't improve hugely your long distance pace in terms of your sprinting, but actually you can improve your acceleration over short distances, because the speed at which you react can be developed, whereas the speed at which you run is obviously not something that you can just magically train to sort of increase and become lightning fast. But I'm not as bothered about that. What I will be interested to see with him in the Premier League at Premier League pace, with Premier League strikers really being claustrophobic around him, is how his decision making and pace, when he either has to run backwards or turn quickly or cover someone else, is affected. We don't know the answer to that. And by the way, Sven Botman at Newcastle is another good example of that. But I think if Chelsea get him, it will be a phenomenal signing. But because he's so young, there absolutely are still one or two areas that he can improve. But that's exciting. And if you get a 22-year-old, any football club, even with a huge reputation, you can't expect them to be the finished product. So you have to give time. And I remember, I'm a Leicester fan, as I openly say, when Ben Chilwell, for example, moved to Chelsea, I think that a lot of people saw what he did at Leicester and were worried in certain areas. And now everyone at Chelsea loves Chilwell. He's versatile, can play in lots of different positions. And people have been quite patient with Chilwell. So that's a good example, I think, of a player that can very quickly win you over. But you do have to accept, whatever their reputation and their price tag, if they arrive on day one that young, regardless of what they've done at Premier League level for a club like Chelsea, there is going to be areas that need to improve.
Yeah, no, 100%. But I think it's definitely an exciting signing. Hopefully in the next week or two, there should be some more movement on that, and hopefully it can get a little bit closer. Just while we're on something about Spain, very briefly, Jules Koundé, another one that's been linked with Chelsea for a long time. Should have happened, in my opinion, last summer. I'm not really sure what the hold-up was there. Again, until the De Ligt news emerged, very much kind of the main target at centre-back this summer. I was surprised to hear that no official bids have gone in for Jules Koundé at all. I was then seeing reports that perhaps it was more a club/Marina Granovskaya target. Although Tuchel was happy to go along with it, he wasn't against it. It wasn't really his main choice. Koundé is still on the table. I mean, you'll be able to tell me better than I know, but I mean, I believe that Koundé is still on the table. But is there a change of sort of feeling on Koundé from Chelsea, or is it very much, they feel that deal could be easy to wrap up and they're kind of focusing on getting someone else in? What do you understand to be the latest with Jules Koundé? Because this is a deal that if Chelsea really wanted him, I'm not sure why it's not done and dusted already.
Well, I mean, it's easy, isn't it, as a fan to sort of say that a player's linked, he's agreed terms, as you say, long-standing terms, and Chelsea, we know, have wanted Jules Koundé for a number of months. But the reality is that even with what we perceive to be a clear-cut deal, like Gabriel Jesus going to Arsenal, at the very last minute, other clubs come in. There's interest that you never hear about. And when people say, why hasn't a deal been completed, it can be for a variety of different reasons. In this case, the big sticking point has been Sevilla and Chelsea agreeing a fee, and Sevilla have been trying to get as close as they possibly can to the release fee number, which is close to 70 million euros. And Chelsea have always wanted to pay something around 50 million quid or in that region. And Sevilla know about the interest from Barcelona as well. So therefore, they're naturally going to play hard ball. And Koundé obviously picked up a little injury as well. I don't think that's hugely affected anything. But Chelsea's stance is simply that they've not given up on this deal. I think De Ligt is the priority of those two, but Chelsea need two centre-backs. So why not both of them? And I think that it's still a very real possibility that Chelsea will come back in for Jules Koundé. And it's not correct necessarily to say that Chelsea have given up or cooled, even though that has been reported, particularly in the Spanish media. Why? Because there's a narrative there that he's going to join Barcelona instead. But let's not forget that as of last week, Chelsea was still talking to Sevilla. They were over there negotiating. You don't do that unless you still have an interest. So I think that it's one of those where Chelsea, in potentially as quick as the next few days, but certainly the next week or two, will realise which other defender is viable and see how things progress with De Ligt. And then they'll make a final decision on Koundé as to whether they are going to come back in and negotiate one final time or just walk away from that deal. So that's the situation with Koundé. It's not on or off. It's too finely poised at this point. And then just in response to you sort of saying, well, why haven't they made a bid or why hasn't this progressed? The window has a bit more finesse to it than that. So often a club will make a bid, it will get rejected, and then there'll be a sort of gentleman's agreement, or the club with the rejected bid will outright deny that they've made a bid. Sometimes you agree with the player first, then you go to the club because you think it gives you leverage. Other times you get the fee with the club first, and then you hope that that prompts the player to agree terms with you because perhaps they feel forced out. And we see that in a lot of different ways, like Raphinha agrees terms first, and now Leeds and Barcelona have obviously got to get a price that matches Chelsea, and that is one way of doing it. But then with De Jong, it's a case of Barcelona and Manchester United negotiating first, and United still haven't spoken to Frenkie de Jong. And the reason for that is because Barcelona want to be in a position where if they decide De Jong can go, they can kind of go to him and go, well, we've already agreed it. And it's almost like a way of forcing him out. So there's tactics around this. So fans from the outside will just read, a player's interested. They've had talks. It's a price we can afford. The player wants the move. Why have we not paid the cash? But you've got to factor in a few things. First of all, other competition. And second of all, as I said right at the very start of the show, if you do the maths of 6 players you want and try and keep that maths within, I'm not saying this is like a hard number, but just for the sake of the game, if every fan watching does the maths on the 6 players they want, but you have to keep it like when you play fantasy football within 200 million, then if you go De Ligt, let's just say for the heck of it, 65 million, and Koundé 55 million, that's 110 million. Add another 45 for Sterling, and you're already over 150 million. Then what 3 players are you going to get in this game? Even though it's a bit redundant, what other 3 players are you going to get for 50 million? And these also are some of the challenges that you might be going for 2 around the 50 or 60 million mark, but have to decide on one. And then it might be a right back like Jonathan Klaus that comes in for 10 or 12 million just to kind of balance the numbers. So I'm by no way making a headline here that that's Chelsea's maximum. Could be 150 million, could be 250 million. But just so fans understand, when they hear names and hear prices, you still have to look at the bigger picture of, can Koundé and De Ligt fall into Chelsea's budget if they're forced to pay that 5 or 10 million extra for both of them? And that remains to be seen. Play the game yourself, list your 6 players, try and keep it within 200 million, but have De Ligt and Koundé, and then work out who else you can afford. And you're pretty much in Chelsea's financial position.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I'd love to see De Ligt and Koundé both, but for me personally, I feel it would be one or the other plus Nathan Ake. I mean, I'd love to see potentially all 3. Maybe Ake could come as a fill-in at left back, maybe. But I mean, that's quite expensive for a backup. I'm not really too sure, but definitely watch this space on that in the next couple of weeks. I mean, Ben, I want to get to one that's popping up in the chat quite a lot. Cristiano Ronaldo. Is it true that he's? I mean, I don't. From what we've seen, obviously that initial news about Ronaldo broke a week or so ago from David Ornstein about obviously Todd Boehly having a meeting with Jorge Mendes. Among many other discussions, it was reported that the possibility of Ronaldo to Chelsea was discussed. Obviously, Mendes, one of the most prominent agents from within the game, has got plenty of clients on his books. And from Boehly's perspective, it makes sense as a new owner to establish a relationship with Mendes. It's then subsequently transpired that in the last couple of days that Ronaldo wants out of United if a suitable offer is received. Now, from your understanding, Ben, I know he's not reported to pre-season training today at United for family reasons, and they still maintain the stance that he is not for sale. But I mean, do you envisage Cristiano Ronaldo to be a Man United player next season? And these links with Chelsea, I know people sort of see, right, Bowley's met his agent, now he wants to leave, and they sort of put 2 and 2 together and think, oh, he's coming to Chelsea. I mean, how likely is a move to Stamford Bridge for Ronaldo? I know very much that any player that signs this summer has got to have Thomas Tuchel's full sign-off. That's what Bowley's doing. And I've read reports today suggesting that a move for Ronaldo or Neymar is more appealing to Bowley than it would be to Thomas Tuchel. I mean, what can you bring up the latest on Ronaldo? And then we'll come on to Neymar later. But yeah, Ronaldo, as far as you understand it.
Well, as you say, I think you summarised it quite well, that Manchester United's stance is not for sale, but they're bound to say that, and we'll learn more in the next week or so, depending on when Ronaldo returns and if he gets on the plane for their pre-season tour. United are still saying that all of that's non-negotiable and they see him as a Manchester United player. And let's just say Chelsea wanted Ronaldo. At that point, Manchester United are more likely to be bullish and almost cause friction because they don't want Ronaldo going to a Premier League rival. Whereas perhaps if a Bayern or a Napoli or a Real Madrid come in, we'll find out whether Manchester United really are of the belief he is not for sale or open to doing some kind of deal. I think that it's inevitable that Ronaldo, if he wants to leave and finds a club, will be gone this summer. Simply because when you get a player of his age and you're Ten Hag trying to start a new era, then if Manchester United allow this to drag on or keep Ronaldo in the dressing room, knowing that he doesn't want to be there, that's a recipe for disaster. So Manchester United may say not for sale, they may believe not for sale, but he can only be not for sale if Manchester United talk to him and get an understanding that he's fully committed. Because a non-fully committed Ronaldo at Manchester United is going to be terrible for the new era of Erik Ten Hag. And what we also know about Ronaldo is that he made up his mind before Ten Hag arrived. And the notion that he's unhappy with transfer business doesn't tally because Malaysia has come in, Martinez is a possibility, Eriksen has a verbal agreement, and there could well be 1 or 2 more. They don't have a ton of money to spend, by the way, comparative to some of their Premier League rivals. But if Malaysia, Martinez, Eriksen comes in, then you can hardly call that a poor start to the window. And for Ronaldo, therefore, to give that as his reason for leaving feels a bit disingenuous. Instead, he wants Champions League football. So that's where Chelsea then comes in, because they're one of the few clubs that might be able to afford him and have that Champions League football. The only other teams that I can think of and that have been linked is Bayern Munich. Bayern are denying that they have any interest, but privately they're saying they'll reassess the situation after Lewandowski likely leaves for Barcelona. So therefore they do have some kind of genuine interest and they're monitoring the situation. Real Madrid will naturally be linked. Napoli is a possibility. And I tell you what, if Manchester United could somehow get Ronaldo to go to Napoli and bring Victor Osimhen the other way, even though that's unlikely, it would be the most incredible bit of business. But just coming back to Chelsea, I think that the crux of it is that this is a test of Bowley versus Tuchel, if you like, because there's absolutely no indication whatsoever that Thomas Tuchel wants Cristiano Ronaldo. So therefore, if Thomas Tuchel has his way, and at the moment Bowley as the interim sporting director is empowered based upon the targets of Thomas Tuchel, then Cristiano Ronaldo will not join Chelsea. If Bowley wants Ronaldo for the brand and the marquee signing, then there's an immediate friction between manager and owner. And even though Thomas Tuchel may admire Cristiano Ronaldo, there's no way in his system and at Ronaldo's age and with Raheem Sterling incoming that Thomas Tuchel would want Cristiano Ronaldo. And not only that, but if you're going to sell it to Ronaldo, you're telling him that he's going to be integral. He's going to play every week. He's going to be the one that leads you to the Champions League. And the fit with Chelsea, even if on paper it seems very neat, doesn't feel right. So people are making the links because it is true that Mendes and Bowley met and they did discuss Cristiano Ronaldo. And Mendes has also offered Ronaldo, or spoken about his future anyway, to Bayern Munich and 2 or 3 other clubs. But the key thing people are missing at the moment anyway is that since that conversation, Chelsea haven't done anything. So there's been no proposal, there's been no movement, there's been no talk of terms in any sort of formal sense. So obviously it's one to watch now over the coming weeks, because it seems like Ronaldo is trying to manufacture an exit. But I agree with you that if Ronaldo was to end up at Chelsea, it would be because Todd Bowley wants him and not because Thomas Tuchel has allocated him as a target. And at the moment, assuming that Bowley continues to work on behalf of Tuchel, being so new at the club, unless he decides out of nowhere to be bullish and out of opportunism for the brand, bring in Ronaldo, then I just don't think this is anything other than paper talk at this stage. So it's one to watch, but I personally would be staggered if Ronaldo ended up at Chelsea. I would be staggered if Chelsea thought that there was any tactical or football sense in the move. And I would be staggered if Manchester United sanctioned the move to a Premier League rival.
Yeah, no, I would be as well. I think it's very much unlikely. But again, part of me would just love to see it, just because, you know, as a footballing superstar, one of the greatest to ever play the game, and to see him at your football club, you know, a Chelsea shirt with Ronaldo on the back as a fan, you know, it's something that's amazing. But when you sort of sit back and think about it from a footballing perspective, would he score goals? Yes. Does it fit the system? No, probably not. But I mean, for me, I just guess, I know there's more to it than this, but if you're presented with an opportunity to sign certain football players, then you don't say no. Like Ronaldo's definitely one of those. Messi's one of those. Maybe Neymar's one of those as well. That leads me on to Neymar next, Ben, very briefly. Again, reports doing the rounds that PSG are prepared to let Neymar leave this summer. And we've had Thiago Silva, a few quotes from him saying that, you know, he'd love Neymar to come to Chelsea. Sounded out through intermediaries. I mean, I've seen a couple last week, perhaps, reports saying that Neymar's representatives had contacted Chelsea. I don't know if it's gone any further than that. Is there a real possibility, Ben, that Neymar leaves PSG this summer? And I mean, reports suggesting that there's only really 2 or 3 clubs that could actually afford him, and those would be all in the Premier League: Chelsea, Newcastle, and Manchester United. Tuchel's obviously managed Neymar before. Neymar had his best season under Thomas Tuchel in terms of output with goals and assists. Can you see the two linking up again, or is this again another one a little bit like Ronaldo? It's probably got a bit more legs and maybe more likely out of the two. But again, is this still quite unlikely as far as you're aware?
It's too early to say, but Neymar is only 30, so there makes a lot more football sense in Neymar over Cristiano Ronaldo, because you might get 2 seasons or even 3 out of him potentially. So, of course, people are linking for the reasons that you say, because of Tuchel and Neymar. And I don't mean to sit on the fence on this. It's just, once again, if you want day-to-day transfer window updates, you're going to see slow progression with certain stories or plot lines, and it is easy to jump the gun. But the truth is that Neymar would prefer to stay at PSG, and seemingly PSG are open and perhaps even would prefer to get Neymar off their books and wage bill. And the complication, I suppose, is that Luis Campos is relatively new, and he is probably going to be the driving force if Neymar does go this summer. And Christophe Galtier hasn't even been announced. That will happen tomorrow afternoon, as I reported this morning. So the new PSG manager needs to talk to Neymar and assess him and work out whether he's a fit and is going to grant Neymar his desire to stay at PSG, or come to something definitive about an exit. And due to the uncertainty, Neymar's people are exploring options. And you're right when you say there's only a few clubs that could afford Neymar, but there are some caveats to that. There could be a loan deal, for example. PSG could continue to pay some of the wages. Neymar, if he goes back to Brazil, might take a wage cut. There are some sort of left field possibilities, and that's because everything is still formative. So as far as I'm aware, there's nothing advanced here. There's nothing likely here yet from a Chelsea perspective. But that's all just because it's too soon to tell at this stage. So the most prudent approach is to wait as a fan and see what the fallout is from Gaultier and Campos talking directly to Neymar, because his position remains that he would actually like to stay at PSG for at least another season. And then if effectively PSG say no to that possibility, then Neymar becomes fully on the market, at which point we wait and see whether Thomas Tuchel would come in for a player like Neymar. The other thing is just that Chelsea with Dembélé were not prepared to match his wage demands, even though they were quite happy to pay him handsomely, nowhere near the wage demands that Dembélé was looking for. And Neymar's wage demands, even if Chelsea think that there's more value to them, will be very high too. So that's another factor here to consider as well. I don't think Neymar is like a Chelsea priority at this stage, but until we know whether Neymar will or won't leave PSG, and there's conflict between seemingly what PSG want and what Neymar and people close to him are saying. And until that's resolved, we won't get any further, and it will just remain sort of exciting speculation, but without too much substance.
Yeah, no, for sure. Again, I guess there's another one to watch out for. And as to say, when Gaultier has announced and he discusses with Campos, again, that decision there will probably have an impact on Neymar's future. So again, I suppose another one to keep an eye out. Ben, just to wrap up very briefly, Ben, back to Barcelona, two players that, I want to start with Raphinha very quickly. Chelsea agreed a fee with Leeds, 65 million pounds, including the add-ons, most of the fee to be paid up front, which is unusual. But obviously, what's been known for a long time is that Raphinha's dream, or whatever you want to call it, is to play for Barcelona. Like with a lot of these Brazilian players from South America, they want to play for Real Madrid's and new Barcelona's. Chelsea, unfortunately, is just not the only club, but you sometimes just can't compete with the pool of those other clubs. He wants to go. Barcelona have not matched what Leeds' valuation is or matched Chelsea's offer. What's the latest from what you understand? Is it still just a waiting game of Raphinha waiting, Deco discussing with Barcelona, etc., when they can offer the money and to Leeds that is acceptable? And is there still a chance Chelsea could get Raphinha?
Chelsea haven't withdrawn,
No.
so there's naturally still a chance. And contrary to reports in Spain, Barcelona haven't agreed a full deal with Leeds United, but talks continue to be advanced. And it was sort of interesting and frustrating to hear Laporta talk publicly about all of Barcelona's business, because what he says in public and what he does in private and with clubs are not always the same. But when he said there is no deadline for Raphinha, that tells you that they do not yet have an agreement with Leeds United. That could change today, tomorrow, next week, next month. But right now, there is no agreement. And therefore, Raphinha is in a really difficult position, because we know his preference is to wait, if he possibly can now, for Barcelona, which is bad news for Chelsea. But contrary to some reports, he's also open to Chelsea. He's a player with two effectively good job offers. His number one is Barcelona, but they're not over the line yet. Whereas Chelsea have offered acceptable financials. A 5-year deal is on the table. Raphinha wouldn't have a problem with any of the money or terms of the deal, and it's Champions League football. So Barcelona may say there's no deadline and may be implying that Raphinha will just play another season at Leeds United, but that's not my understanding. This will be resolved this window. So therefore, Raphinha either has to go back to Leeds and hope Barcelona get a deal done by the end of the window, or otherwise go to Chelsea and have a little bit more stability. And who knows, stability could still be really important in terms of deciding his future and getting on with it in a World Cup year. But I don't see any possibility at this stage anyway, where Raphinha says, no worries, Barcelona, prioritize Lewandowski, bring in Koundé, get Dembélé to sign, and I'll see you in January or next summer. First of all, because of the lack of reliability that there may be follow through on that. And second of all, because there is still a good offer on the table by Chelsea. So Chelsea are not just waiting. They have tactics of their own. One of those was to agree a deal quickly with Leeds. And by the way, the Leeds ownership were, from what I understand, hugely impressed by how Bowley conducted himself and how smooth those negotiations were. And that's why they want to honour, if they can, the Chelsea price and deal, which Barcelona now have to match. So this could still have some twists, but the most likely scenario is that Barcelona will eventually find the cash, especially because the football club have got a cash injection now, and Raphinha will end up signing. And I think that in an ideal world, Barcelona want Dembélé to sign on cut terms, and then they can bring in Raphinha as well. But if there is a scenario, let's just say in the next week or so, like if it happens in the next week or so and they sign him, the Spanish press will all say, we were right, the deal was already agreed, but it's not gone that far yet. But if they get an agreement in the next week or two, then there's only one place that Raphinha is going to go, and that's Barcelona. And then if they don't, then Chelsea have got two options. One is they say to Raphinha, if you don't make a full decision now, we're pulling our offer. And that's a bullish tactic. And who knows, that might work. I'm not saying I've been given any intimation that's what Chelsea will do, but it's scenario one. Or scenario two is Chelsea just leave the offer lingering for the entire window with nothing really to lose and see what happens. And they assume they're not going to get the player, but the offer remains. And then if things fall through with Barcelona and they don't get another attacking target, they swoop in. But Raphinha is playing a really risky game. So he either has to be confident that Leeds and Barcelona will agree a deal, or he could find himself not getting Barcelona and not getting Chelsea and being stuck at Leeds United. And I think Chelsea are trying to play on that we're the club with the good financials. We've made you a strong offer. We've given you a 5-year contract. We've been quick. We've already agreed a deal. You've got Champions League football. Come to us in a World Cup year now, or wait and see what happens with Barcelona. But you might end up being disappointed because they're not as reliable at the moment in the transfer market as Robert Lewandowski has found as well. So I think that's the situation. But, you know, the long and short of it is that in a straight choice now between Chelsea and Barcelona, even though both are of appeal, if both clubs have agreed a fee and both clubs have agreed terms, then we know that Raphinha will pick Barcelona.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'd love him to pick Chelsea, but I mean, as you say, if Barcelona can get themselves together, then he'll definitely go there. Ben, very briefly, a minute or so, Ousmane Dembélé, another player Chelsea have been heavily linked with. He's a free agent now, maybe gives Chelsea a little bit more leverage in negotiations. But again, from what I've understand, or from what I've read, and from what I've seen, like yourself and other journalists put out, is that the only offer that remains on the table for Dembélé is that offer from Barcelona. I think it's €6 million net per season. I read somewhere wants 12 million. I'm not sure he's going to get that. Very briefly, what is your understanding on the future of Dembélé? Do you still think his priority is to stay at Barcelona?
I mean, the Dembélé situation is bordering on farce, and anything looking likely with Dembélé takes a twist, even as late as last night. So he had a new contract offer on the table at roughly a 40% pay cut. He was supposed to sign it in the evening so he could come back to preseason training, and he still hasn't signed. So you just can't read the player or his agent anymore. And quite clearly, there's games on all sides. So Barcelona still think he's going to sign. Xavi believes that he wants to stay, but Dembélé is delayed, U-turned, rejected, verbally accepted and not signed. And it gets to the point now where, unless you want to pull your hair out, you may as well just let the player do his thing and forget about it. But the only sort of difference to the situation now is that Dembélé has less leverage because he's not contracted to Barcelona. He is a free agent and preseason is starting. So the Spanish press still think that he'll find a way to do a deal, even though he keeps missing all of these deadlines. And Spanish sources that I talk to at Barcelona naturally are pushing the same narrative. I mean, Laporta said it publicly that he wants Dembélé and Raphinha. But the only difference, as I reported a few months back, or a few weeks back to be more accurate, is that Chelsea and other potentially interested clubs were never going to move until he was a free agent. So because that's only been for a short period of time, Barca could still get hijacked here. And that, I think, is why Dembélé is waiting and waiting and waiting. But he's playing as risky a game as Raphinha, probably a riskier game, because Now he's missed another deadline. There's fractions within the Barca board that are saying, forget it, pull it. He's just not worth it. Don't keep giving him a contract on a bit of string to reel in as and when he sees fit. And I wonder how many times, just my personal opinion, Dembélé can keep doing this before eventually Barcelona just walk away entirely. And then at that point, the door becomes open to other clubs and they can offer Dembélé worse terms than he wants simply because there is no kind of counter offer and there's no current contract. Whereas, say, with De Jong, he's contracted until 2026 on good money, which means if you want him at Manchester United, you have to pay good money. And he's got no obligation to even take a pay cut at Barcelona. So again, it's one to watch. I've stopped second guessing this one now because the agent says one thing, the player says one thing, Barcelona say one thing. But Chelsea's position has always been quite clear that Thomas Tuchel does like Dembélé for sure. And it's easy to think if Raphinha doesn't happen that Dembélé gets bumped back up the pecking order. But Chelsea were never going to move until Dembélé, formally anyway, was a free agent. And that's really only been for a matter of days. So it's a case of watching this space. But at this point, I can say no more because Chelsea still haven't made a concrete offer, a formal one anyway, and are still off his wage demands. And Barcelona keeps saying he's going to sign, and yet he constantly misses deadlines. Yeah. So the whole thing is now bordering on farce. And I think the only warning from Chelsea's perspective is if this is how the player acts and the agent acts, then is he the right fit, regardless of his talent, for your dressing room? And I think even though Tuchel knows him and therefore has a better perspective than me, I still think it is a valid question for the new owners to ask.
Yeah, no, I'd 100% agree. I mean, Ben, it's been fascinating, some great insight as always. Could talk for ages. I know you've got to shoot. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate your time as always. Guys, make sure you follow Ben on Twitter, linked in the description, and obviously on his display name there as well. And check out CBS as well, because that's where Ben does a lot of his work also. So make sure you go over there, have a little look as well. Guys, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for getting involved in the chat. Appreciate it as always. Please do smash a like on the stream. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you're new, please do help me. I'm on the road to 1,000 now. Not too many more to go. So help me get there before the start of the season. Every new subscriber helps. But guys, until then, take care and up the Chels.